Yeah.
All right.
That's nice. Okay. I guess we can start now. Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to our next talk. It's really wonderful to have you all here with us. Just a few things before we start with our main event. For those of you who are less familiar with the Riot Science Club, and as a refresher for those of you who know us well, the Riot Science Club is a self-organizing initiative. We host weekly seminars that aim to provide training in reproducible, interpretable, open, and transparent science. All our events are free and open to anyone. And if you cannot make a particular event or would like to keep track of upcoming events, please check out our website, OSF, Twitter, and YouTube channel. And you can also join our mailing list. The links will be going in the chat box shortly. And just a bit of housekeeping before I introduce our speaker for today. You can ask your questions in the Q&A message board. Please keep questions coming throughout the session, and they will be fed to the speaker at the end of the talk. So that's a bit about riots and housekeeping. And I'm absolutely delighted now to introduce you to our speaker. Today, we're joined by Dr. Agata Bochynska, who is also a Riot Norway colleague. And those of you who have attended our recent events might have seen her. Agata will be talking about preregistration of studies and challenges and benefits related to it. Agata is a psychologist and a linguist with a background in experimental research on language and cognitive development in diverse populations. Currently, she works on implementing and teaching open and reproducible research practices at the University of Oslo. And before that, she was at New York University and also at Norwegian University of Science and Technology, where she got her PhD. And Agata is also a founding member of the newly established Norwegian Reproducibility Network, NORN. NORN is a peer-led network that aims to promote and enable rigorous, robust, and transparent research practices in Norway. We'll put the link to NORN website in the chat. And I also want to add that Agata is also a really amazing collaborator. So let's get started. I'm looking forward to your talk, Agata. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Tamara. Thank you for the kind words and for this nice introduction. And welcome, everybody. I'm so happy to be able to give this talk today, tell you a little bit about pre-registrations. And as Tamara mentioned, if you are joining us from Norway, we have started Norway's reproducibility network. If you would like to join, or if you would like to just be updated about what we're doing, what we're up to, you can write to us, you can join our mailing list. So this is just to signal that, that it's out there, and hopefully we'll grow bigger very soon. But today we're focusing on preregistration, and I will try to walk you through some benefits, including some selfish benefits for pre-registering studies, some challenges that we can face on the way, and some practical tips that can also make it easier for you. But first, let me start off with saying something about why we are here and why we are talking about pre-registration at all. So the credibility of academic research is under debate and has been for at least about 2 decades now. And starting with the controversial then, now not so much probably anymore, article on why most published research findings are false, identifying issues such as study power or bias in scientific research. Since then, other academics have been picking up this debate and trying to identify different reasons for why that would be the case. Among those, there were at least 3 main problems identified in academic research. The first one is that negative or boring results are less likely to be published and more likely to end up in a file drawer. And the percentage of papers reporting positive findings, so findings supporting authors' original hypothesis, is pretty much implausible. And that's a similar issue for different disciplines with small differences, but it's oscillating there around 80, 90% of positive findings reported, which is most likely not really a reflection of what's really happening in research. Another issue is that researchers are biased and they make a lot of arbitrary decisions, sometimes even cherry picking data processing and analysis strategies to arrive at a desired significant result, most often expressed as p-value lower than 0.05, as many of you might know, and that's something called p-hacking. They also sometimes change their original hypothesis based on the observed outcomes, something termed as harking, so hypothesizing after the results are known. And then the third issue is that confirmatory and exploratory research are being often mixed up. So there's nothing wrong with either, but reporting one as the other can be problematic. So these issues all together, this file drawer problem and publication bias, the researcher degrees of freedom, and mixing up confirmatory and exploratory research, might have been some of the reasons for what we have been observing in social sciences and also in other disciplines that has been also termed replication crisis. Now, whether it should be called a replication crisis and what it really means for science really and for research more broadly is actually an interesting debate in itself. Some prefer to call it a credibility revolution to sort of underline the positive impact it has on improving scientific research. But replicability issues have been observed across different disciplines. And maybe many of us here know about it mostly in the context of psychological science, but large replication efforts have been done in experimental philosophy, in education, sciences, in economics, in cancer research. And when we look at the average outcome across all these different efforts, we can see that around half of the studies do not replicate. Now, this will differ depending on discipline, right? So it might be slightly different number in psychology compared to economics, and cancer research compared to experimental philosophy, but generally around half of the studies will not observe the same outcomes when applying the same methods and procedures. Now, what are the exact reasons for that is an empirical question and is still being investigated, but some of it could be due to these 3 issues that we have pointed out just a moment ago. So here is where pre-registration could, to some extent, help. So just to be on the same page about what pre-registration is exactly, because some interpret it in different ways. Here, I'm talking about pre-registration as specification of a research design, hypothesis, and/or analysis plan prior to observing the outcomes of the study. And I say and/or because you might pre-register only analysis plan, you might pre-register only specification of a research design, but generally it takes a form of this timestamp frozen document made available on an online platform. And when thinking about what to pre-register, ideally everything you can plan ahead of time, but at least research questions and hypotheses, if you pre-register just that, you can do that as that sort of minimal pre-registration. but you can also pre-register study design and data collection methods, something that you probably do have already specified and already detailed right before you start your data collection or your data analysis. And then ideally also data pre-processing or processing in an analysis plan. So just to give you a very, very simple example of how it could look. So let's say I want to run a study where, you know, I just throw a coin. I throw a coin a bunch of times. I want to check if it's fair. And my hypothesis is that the coin is fair. So my prediction is that when throwing a coin multiple times, I will observe equal number of heads and tails, right? So this is my hypothesis. I can pre-register that hypothesis before I start any data collection. Now I can also pre-register my methods. So I planned to throw a coin 100 times and register the outcome, head or tail, each time after it falls on the floor, okay? And my data collection will stop after a sample size of 100 because I will do 100 throws. So no matter what happens in the data, I stop my data collection there. I decided that beforehand, right? And then I can also pre-register my data pre-processing plan. So the way I'll process my data will be that I will label my head outcomes as ones, and I will label my tails outcomes as zeros in some sort of spreadsheet where I will be registering that data. And then I can also register my data analysis plan. So my data analysis plan for this one is that I will perform a t-test on the data against chance level. Chance level is 0.5 to see whether it's any significant from chance. Of course, if it's fair, it should not be significant from chance at all, right? So pre-registration in real life probably will not look like this. It will definitely not look as simple as this example, but this is this very, very simple case where you could literally pre-register every element with just, you know, one sentence, right? Now, there are two ways of pre-registering your study. You can do a sort of regular pre-registration where you develop an idea, you design a study, and then you write up your pre-registration, your whole plan for data collection, analysis, your hypothesis, your research questions, and you pre-register that and timestamp on an online platform. There is no peer review involved. You just write it up, you put it out there, you timestamp it, it becomes a frozen document, right? And then you go on, collect, analyze your data, you write your report, and you go on and publish your article in whatever journal you would like. But there is also this, this thing called register reports. Some of you might know it really well already. In this particular case, it's also called peer-reviewed pre-registration because after developing an idea and designing a study, you actually submit your pre-registration to a journal. And you go through this stage 1 peer review. If you get in-principle acceptance, you go and you collect and analyze your data, you write a report, and you go through stage 2 peer review. And that happens at the same journal where you submitted that first initial pre-registration, and then you publish your report. And already over 300 scientific journals use this register reports publishing format, either as a regular submission option or as a part of a single special issue. And it seems like it works. So when we look at the numbers of standard reports versus register reports, in terms of publication bias, standard reports still report this, you know, around 90% of positive results, so 90% of results that support authors' hypothesis. But when you look at the register reports, this number drops significantly. So it's more or less half-half of papers that report null results, so results that do not support authors' original hypothesis, and around half papers that do report support for the original hypothesis. It also seems like from recent research on register reports that they also report higher quality methods and analysis and results. So here is a comparison of register reports and standard reports, and the space of sort of positive values here on this side is where register reports got a higher score, right? So this is where register reports outperform standard reports on things like methods rigor, quality of methods, quality of questions, but also quality of results and discussion and overall quality of paper. So it seems like there is something there about quality, improved quality in register reports. Okay, so you already get a sense of, okay, like this clearly has some benefits. And when I talk about benefits, I mean both register reports and these non-peer-reviewed preregistrations that you just put out there on an online platform, right? And they're not peer-reviewed. So in general, one of the big benefits is the higher visibility to null results, more visibility to research ideas and plans early in the process, more trust in research studies through these reduced biases, through sort of restricting the researchers' degrees of freedom, and also clear distinction between confirmatory and exploratory research, as well as between this a priori and post hoc analysis, and maybe reduce redundancy of research studies. I'm not sure if preregistrations or register reports actually do that. I would be super happy to hear if there has been research on that already. But there is a potential of reducing redundancy of research studies if somebody can see that, oh, this research has been already pre-registered, and we'll maybe just wait for their results. We'll not run a very similar study that we thought initially of running. And then there are some selfish benefits. So what kind of benefits does this have for you as a researcher, or you as a student, or you as a person that wants to advise somebody on registration? So you will be more transparent about your research and analysis plans, and through that automatically increase trust in your work. You will be encouraged to think more deeply about research design and plan analysis before you collect your data, since you'll have to sit down and put it all on paper. So to say, you will be forced to think through very carefully all the steps in your research plan. You can claim early credit for your research ideas. You will timestamp your research ideas and your research plans with your name on that document. Pre-registrations can be cited. So if they're visible, if they're out there and you make them public and visible, you can claim credit for your research ideas. You will also increase visibility of your research and odds of getting published, despite these negative or boring findings. This point mostly speaks to this register report format, but also if you do non-peer-reviewed pre-registration and then you submit your article later to a journal, you're reporting your pre-registered study, reviewers also usually look very positively at the fact that you're very transparent about your plans and your hypotheses and your analysis. So that might also increase the odds of being published regardless. You will be also more competitive on academic job markets because actually more and more listings on the academic job market mention scientific transparency and open science practices, including pre-registrations. That also applies for grant applications. So increasing number of funders wants to see that you will be practicing open science, and you will be implementing these practices in your work. Now, that doesn't come without challenges. So this all sounds like rainbows and unicorns, but it's not really like that. Of course, it comes with certain challenges or hurdles. So there is more time required at the planning phase. No discussion here. You will spend more time planning your study and writing up your pre-registration. So you will have to dedicate more time to this before you start data collection. But on the other hand, a sort of counter argument to this is that less time is required at the analysis and writing stage. So for me personally, it was much easier to write up a pre-registered study where so much information was already in the pre-registration document compared to non-pre-registered study. So in a way, that sort of time dedication here just gets shifted from post-data collection to pre-data collection. But there might be higher visibility of errors. So for example, if you pre-register wrong types of analysis, that's in a frozen timestamp document, right? So it will be there. It will be sitting there if you made a mistake, so other people can see it, of course. And you might realize later that, oh no, I pre-registered wrong analysis. I want to change that. And sure, you can change that, but of course, it will always be visible that you pre-registered wrong type of analysis, for example, or wrong type of data processing. Now, whether that really is a drawback, I don't know, because I personally think that there should be higher visibility of errors in academia. We should normalize the fact that we make errors. Researchers, whether young researchers or more senior researchers, are terrified of admitting that they made an error. I don't think that's healthy. I think we should be normalizing errors in science because this is basically how we work. This is how we do it. We make errors all the time, and the fact that we can correct them is really what progress is in science. So I don't really consider this to be a disadvantage, but I do know that many can be discouraged by that fact. Then there is this challenge of having less flexibility. Once you pre-register your analysis, they're frozen in a timestamp document. And many will say, well, okay, but then it's very difficult to change what you planned originally. You can make changes to pre-registration, but even if you don't, of course, you can report analysis outside of pre-registration. So yes, it will restrict flexibility. But then we could also argue that it maybe restricts that flexibility that you shouldn't have, right? That sort of flexibility that also allows you to exploit data analysis to the point where you're sort of chasing the desired effect, right? But definitely it does introduce certain reduction of flexibility. And then among these challenges, or like sort of in the context of these challenges, there are sort of also these limits of pre-registration. So there are certain things that pre-registration cannot do, cannot offer, will not give us no matter how much we would want that. And one of these things is that, well, sure, writing pre-registration may improve your study design and analysis, but there is no quality standard. So it's entirely possible to pre-register a horrible study, to pre-register a study of really poor quality, and just the fact that the study is pre-registered, and here especially I'm talking about this non-peer-reviewed pre-registration, right? Just because the study is pre-registered doesn't mean that it's better than a non-pre-registered study. There's no quality stamp. There's no assurance that that this will be a better study. So we do need to remember about that. It might also give a false sense of security. Even though it helps protect from biases, it can do only so much, right? So to some extent, it is still based on trust. I mean, these different platforms where we can pre-register our studies, they do give you a reliable timestamp, right? It's very difficult to go around that. At least I think I never tried to hack the system, so I think it's difficult. But it might give that false sense of security that it's solving a lot of issues when it's solving only some of the issues, and then it is still relying to some extent on trust. And then there is this problem of, does it improve statistical inference? Can it even improve statistical inference? Probably not. There is some research that points to no, it's not improving really statistical inference, but it does help to differentiate a priori and post hoc analysis and to be transparent about that. And then finally, it might not help with and might distract from other necessary reforms in science, like, for example, theory building. So we do need to improve different aspects of the academic system, of how we do science, and of course, pre-registration is not something that will solve all of these issues. And there have been some voices saying that not only it's not solving everything, but it can also distract us from all these other necessary reforms. And there is a really fascinating debate about all these other branches of scientific reform that we should pay attention to. And I absolutely agree that we should. So we should not treat pre-registration as this sort of full global solution to all the issues that we have in science right now. And then there are some myths that are circulating about pre-registration and what pre-registration does or does not do that I would really like to debunk. So first of all, it's said that it prevents exploratory research. It absolutely does not prevent exploratory research. You can do as much exploratory research as you want, either within or beyond of what you pre-register. It's also said that it limits research creativity or flexibility. You can be as creative as you want when planning your research, and you can put it all on paper, but then again, in addition to what you put in the pre-registration, you're still free to do whatever you want outside of what's been pre-registered, as long as you're transparent about, you know, this was planned beforehand and this is something that we did later on. Then there is this concern about other scooping idea and your research plan. Well, in a way, pre-registration actually prevents that, because you pre-register with your name and timestamp on the pre-registration document. So you actually have a documentable proof of when you started your study. So I'm not sure how often scooping happens in this particular case, but you can also, in addition, easily prevent that if you actually hide your pre-registration for a certain amount of time. It's possible to embargo your pre-registration for the time when you're collecting your data, and then you don't have to worry about others scooping your idea. And then finally, the argument that there is no way to decide on data processing and analysis without looking at the data, that might be true for some specific disciplines, but generally there are lots of ways to test out your data processing and data analysis solutions. You can simulate the data. You can use existing data from repositories out there. You can pilot your study, or you can do something on mock data. You can literally create mock data and try to test out how your data processing and analysis paradigms work there. So hopefully that debunks some of the myths around pre-registration. And now on to some practical tips, because I wouldn't want to leave you with just sort of theoretical account of what pre-registration is and what are the benefits and challenges, but I would like to give you some practical tips that will maybe help you overcome some of the challenges or difficulties around that. So first of all, how to pre-register in not only 1, 2, 3, but 4 relatively straightforward steps. First of all, choose the platform and the template, and there are lots of platforms out there for you to consider. Choose the one that fits with your research discipline and with your study type. So we will be talking a little bit about pre-registering on open science framework. So these OSF registries that have lots of different types of templates, but there are also these discipline specific platform. So if you do clinical research, then clinicaltrials.gov, it's one of the most famous and actually the very first, probably pre-registration platform that appeared. If you do animal research, Animal Study Registry is a great place with nicely adjusted template for literally any animal research. If you do randomized controlled trials in economics or social sciences, then Social Science Registry could be a place to go. If you're just starting with pre-registration, or if you're teaching pre-registration to others, then As Predicted is a very simple, straightforward pre-registration platform that asks you only, I think, 9 questions maybe. And it's very easy to pre-register there. Now, once you've chosen your platform and the template, then you can sit down and write up. Of course, given that you do have your analysis or your research design and analysis plan and your hypothesis. So think through carefully all that you want to put on paper, and be precise about things like exclusion criteria, like your stopping rule, handling missing data, and outliers. Try out your methods and plan analysis in a pilot study or on mock data, and think about possible unexpected scenarios. So you will never avoid, I think, unexpected scenarios. It's almost impossible. You will also never predict all of them. So it's very difficult to know in advance what could happen. But if you can, it would be great to have some sort of plan B or C in case things go differently than the way you planned. And then in step 2, and then when you're writing up in that step 2, try to be as precise as possible. So instead of saying general things like, we are interested in testing group differences, that's probably not the best way to say it in a pre-registration. Try to say more precise things, like we hypothesize that groups A and B will differ in condition X based on this or that. Similarly, with excluding participants or your exclusion criteria, it's probably too general to say we'll exclude inattentive participants, because how do you define inattentive? It's better to say something like we'll exclude participants who did not pass 2 out of 3 control questions, and then not passing 2 out of 3 control questions will be your definition of inattentiveness, and then you're very clear about how you will identify your inattentive participants. And then similarly with removing outliers, probably don't just say that you will remove outliers, but say something like, we'll remove influential observations identified through Cook's distance analysis. So it doesn't have to be that, right? You can use completely different way of identifying your outliers. It doesn't have to be Cook's distance analysis or any similar analysis. It's just about saying precisely about who are your outliers, how you will identify. And then when you have written up in step 3, you can register and you can timestamp. And important a practical tip here is that you can decide whether you want your pre-registration to be open to public or closed until the results are published. So you can put this embargo on pre-registration, especially if you pre-register on OSF, on Open Science Framework. You can choose that time there. And then final step, if you have to, you can actually implement changes to pre-registration, because even the best plans might need changes once they are implemented. So when reporting deviations from this original pre-register plan, just be explicit about what has changed. If needed, you can upload changes to your timestamped pre-registration, or you can pre-register a whole new plan, but then make sure that you refer to the original pre-registration and explain why you made the changes that you made. So those are some practical tips for the very process of pre-registration. Now, practical tip set 2, how to get the most out of your pre-registration. So make sure that you adapt it to your discipline and the type of study you want to conduct. And this is basically when you will get the most out of your pre-registration. So it is possible to pre-register, for example, qualitative studies, but that pre-registration will look differently compared to quantitative research pre-registration. So in quantitative research, we would ask questions like, have the right confirmatory analysis been carried out based on the original hypothesis when you write up your pre-registered study? In qualitative research, we'll be interested in something slightly different. So here, we'll be interested in whether the right data collection and analysis methods have been used. Is the interpretation convincing based on the original theoretical framework and your planned methodology? So pre-registration will look different depending on scientific discipline or the type of your research study. And you can get the most out of it by choosing the right template for your pre-registration, by taking a look at pre-registration examples for similar studies before you write up yours, and also by consulting with your colleagues within your discipline, within the field of research that your study's in, consulting with them if they have experience with pre-registration in your field and what kind of tips or tricks they could have. What do they think is important? Maybe they have ready-made templates that are better than templates that you can find online, and you can take and use their templates. When I worked in a lab at New York University, my lab had basically already developed some sort of template for infant studies, infant studies within developmental psychology work. And it was much easier for me to work within that type of document than work within any sort of predefined template online on Open Science, for example. So make that decision depending on what's easiest for you within your field. And there are also a lot of helpful guides put together by other researchers for pre-registering these maybe less typical studies for pre-registration. So there is a guide for pre-registering qualitative research. There is a guide for pre-registering exploratory research, because that's also possible. There is a guide for pre-registering secondary data analysis, so analysis of pre-existing data. So go out there and sort of use what people have already discovered. Do not reinvent the wheel. Just try to sort of use what's most practical from what people have done already and discovered. And then the last set of practical tips, because I promised I would do that, are the practical tips for pre-registering on OSF framework. So I just wanted to show you a couple of things that can make it easier for you when you will go on and pre-register on OSF framework. So let me pull up OSF real quick, and hopefully you can see OSF registries. If not, then please shout. But when you get to OSF registries, then you will see this browse registrations part, where you can see actually a lot of examples of pre-registrations that other people put up and made public. So if you click on see more, you can see that it's actually pulling up pre-registrations from different types of online platforms. For example, you can click on clinicaltrials.gov, but you can also click on OSF registry. So this will show you all pre-registrations that are publicly available to check that were pre-registered on Open Science framework. And you can scroll through those. You can choose the registration type. For example, if you're interested in qualitative pre-registration or secondary data pre-registration, for example, you can take a look at these examples and try to see what people are doing. Now, be careful, because of course, as I said before, there's no quality stamp. Open Science Framework is this type of online platform where you pre-register this non-peer-reviewed research plans. So you can, in principle, put up there anything, really anything, anything you want. So you might stumble into really high quality, great preregistrations, and you might find also not so great preregistrations that maybe you wouldn't want to use as a template, right? So just make sure you take a look at several examples and maybe also consult with your colleagues if you're not experienced with that, just so that you can double check if this is something that you could use, that something that you could follow, right? Or good practice that you could follow. All right, so so do take a look at examples. It will make your life easier. Now, going back to the main registries page, when you want to pre-register on Open Science Framework, you click on Add New in the registries, and it will ask you whether you have content for registration in an existing OSF project. I would suggest create the project. You can click on yes, I have a content once you created a project on OSF, and you can select your project. And for example, I have a test project here in this OSF, and I can pre-register as a part of that, project. And then you can make sure that your pre-registration will be sitting there together with your project. And later on, maybe you can also, within the same project page, you can also put up your study materials. Maybe you can share your anonymized data. Maybe you can also put up preprints for your study. You will have everything in one place, and it makes it easier. Now, whether you're pre-registering as a part of the project or not, regardless of that, in the next step, you will have to choose the type of registration that you would like to create. And here is where you can choose the template. And OSF has many different templates. Open-ended registration is where you can just upload your pre-registration document. You don't have to fill it out on OSF. Standard or the OSF pre-registration is where you will have to go through all the steps, filling it out on OSF. You also have pre-registration for social psychology, for qualitative research, for replication studies, and for secondary data collection and analysis. So explore these templates, try to see how they look, and try to figure out which one would fit best with the type of research that you would like to pre-register. And also, especially these templates like OSF pre-registration templates, if you click on create a draft, you will see that this template has all these different components here on the left side, like study information, like design plan, sampling plan, and they will ask you all these questions as a part of the template that will actually, if you're not experienced with pre-registration, they will guide you through step by step the whole pre-registration process. So if you do not have your own template, if you do not want to write pre-registration as a your own separate document, you can use these templates as guides and see what kind of information they might require from you for this type of pre-registration. All right, and once you fill out your template, if you are pre-registering on OSF, you can go to review, and if I would fill out all these details that I haven't filled out, I would be able to click on register. And when you click on register, you can choose embargo period. So this period when your pre-registration will not be visible to anybody. You do not have to put embargo on your pre-registration at all, then it will be immediately made public. So think through whether you do need that embargo period. Maybe you can just make your pre-registration immediately visible to everybody in the community. If not, then put the embargo, but then you can decide about the amount of time that you need the pre-registration hidden. I think Open Science Framework now allows up to 4 years of embargo. So you can choose up to 4 years, but you can also choose 1 year or half a year or 2 years. And then finally, use their help guide. So here on top, you see the help button. And if you go to help and you go to registrations, you will have really extensive help guides that they're also updating, where you can read in detail about how to create pre-registrations here called registrations. If you click, for example, on start a registration, they will walk you through with screenshots. They will walk you through all the steps exactly of how to make your own registration on Open Science Framework. So use these help guides because, well, they're really helpful. So those are just a couple of tips and tricks for OSF. Just to summarize, take a look at the examples. Pre-register is a part of project component. Choose the template that works for you in your study. Think through that embargo period and use these help guides if you pre-register there. And then finally, to just wrap it all together, remember that it's really all about transparency. And you can make changes to the pre-registration or report non-pre-registered findings as long as you're explicit about what was planned and what was not planned. So just keep that in mind. Don't let it scare you in terms of, reducing your flexibility or your, possibility of conducting exploratory research. It's absolutely not that. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it is really about the transparency of what we are doing in research. All right. Thank you so much. You can read more about pre-registration on OSF pre-registration pages, and I'm always happy to connect and chat about pre-registration. You can write me an email directly. You can connect with me on Twitter. I'm always happy to take up a conversation about that. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Agata, for your wonderful talk. It was really fantastic, and I'm so happy that you provided us with both theoretical, if I can say so, background, but also with practical tips, because as we know, open science is both a set of beliefs, how science should work, but also practices that we sometimes forget to speak about how to do open science. So it was so clear, and so yeah, it was fantastic. Thanks so much. I think we can take questions now.
Yeah, great. Of course. Feel free, everybody, to write your questions in the Q&A. We still have around 10 minutes for questions, so more than happy to answer them. And we have one question from Levan.
He is asking, thank you for a very informative talk. OSF has a new update function allowing you to update the pre-registration. Do you have any tips on when and how to use this function? Should we report all changes, even minor things, or perhaps best to only report more significant changes? So.
Yeah, great point. Great point there. Yes, Open Science Framework, OSF registries introduced this possibility to update your pre-registrations. So the original one will always be, there will always be a record of your original one, right? That's always archived. And it's not going anywhere. Even if you withdraw it, the metadata from your original pre-registration will always be there. So remember about that. But you can introduce updates to pre-registration. And now it depends how much they affect your outcomes and your research, right? Because if you just slightly deviated from your original analysis plans, or if you decided to run more analysis in addition to what you pre-registered, you can also just report that in the final paper, right? You don't need to update your pre-registration. You can just report that, well, in addition to what we pre-registered, we also wanted to run all these other analyses and do all these explorations. Now, if you would like these analyses to be a part of these confirmatory a priori analyses that are included in the pre-registration, then maybe it makes sense to actually update your pre-registration. Let's say you still haven't finished data collection, you haven't peeked at the data at all, you just came up with this one additional analysis that you would really like would be a part of the a priori pre-data collection planned analysis. If you feel strongly about that, that's something that you can add to pre-registration, in my opinion, because then it will be included in this pre-plan, and it might have something to say that, you know, this is time-stamped, we still haven't finished data collection then, so, you know, you want to show that that you planned that before you saw any data from the study. Otherwise, any major changes to, for example, data collection methods or research design. So let's say you started data collection, and then let's say you collected data from, I don't know, 10 subjects or 20 subjects, and it turns out, oh no, right, something is really wrong with our method. We need to completely change or slightly change the method. This is when you probably have to update pre-registration or pre-register a new plan. That happened to me in one of my postdoc studies. It turned out that we probably did not have the correct instructions we were giving to our participants. And then we pre-registered a new plan, except that we were very transparent about there is a previous pre-registration for this. We unfortunately, or not unfortunately, I mean, we had to make these and these and these changes. Here is a new pre-registration, but we do refer to the previous one as that first pre-registration. Now, in terms of, I will very quickly show you in terms of how you can do the updating on OSF. In the help guides, you have updating registrations tab. If you click on that, you can go to start an update, for example, and again, it will walk you through when you have a pre-registration as a part of your project, you have this update button. And this is when you can start updating, and then you can go to entering your update. Oh, and I cannot do that. And it should walk you through how to enter your update, or how you can access it from my registrations page. So they have quite clear instructions on how to do that in practice, although I think Levin's question was mostly about, well, when should I do it, right? And this is ultimately your decision as a researcher about what you choose to introduce as an update to your pre-registration.
Thanks, Agata. I have a question. So you said, and we know that there are several templates for pre-registering studies, and this is nice thing. But do you think that they are easily accessible? Can we find them easily? Yeah.
Yeah, so there are different ways to do that, right? So again, I will come back to OSF, and maybe I will go directly to OSF registries. So one way of accessing templates is on Open Science Framework to access these templates through what OSF has to offer, sort of. So if you, for example, want to pre-register qualitative research, and you will create a draft here, then you will see immediately if it will allow me to access the draft. Then you see the template through seeing all these different steps, right? And all these different questions that it asks you to fill out, like the research aims and your research questions and so on. So, so this functions as a template for qualitative research, right? Now, another way to do it is to take a look at all these examples, right? And maybe there is an example on OSF. I mean, it takes some time to browse through different ones, but maybe there is an example in OSF that you could use as your own template. So if you narrow down your search, you can also click on see an example, or you can browse through these different registrations. And if you narrow down your search to the type of study, pre-registration that you're after, then maybe you will find one that you can use, right? And then the third way is probably to go around and ask your colleagues in your field, if you know people or you suspect that they are pre-registering their studies, then that could be a way of getting access to good templates because maybe they have them.
Thanks so much. And one more question about pre-registering qualitative research. Do you know, are there any reasons for not doing this? Or do you know any critics of doing or pre-registering qualitative studies? So could you say a bit about it?
Yeah, so that's a really good point. And I feel like we often get questions about that, or at least I very often get questions about that, because when we talk about, pre-registering hypotheses and your planned analysis and processing of data, that all mostly touches on quantitative research, right? And then qualitative researchers very often are like, well, but like, how am I supposed to pre-register what I have? Because I don't have clear hypotheses. I more have research aims rather than hypotheses, right? And rather than clear analysis plans, I more have a plan of how I will look at the data, but not really statistical analysis plan. It's still possible to pre-register that. It doesn't work exactly the same way, of course, as with quantitative pre-registration. But as I said, if I can come back to this slide, when you pre-register qualitative research, you're more interested in answering slightly different questions, right? So if you submit an article that reports pre-registered qualitative study, it's more about checking, have you applied the right data collection and analysis methods? Not necessarily statistical methods, but just methods of how you will look at the data, right? Is the interpretation convincing based on the theoretical framework that you put in your pre-registration and plan methodology? So it is possible to pre-register that. I think that whatever increases transparency is worth doing, and pre-registering your research aims, your methodology, and the plans for what you will do with data and how you will look at data. I think that already increases the transparency of your research, even though it's not as much about, distinguishing confirmatory and exploratory research probably in qualitative studies. But I also know people that will say, well, no, don't bother. Don't pre-register qualitative research because it doesn't really serve the same function as pre-registering quantitative confirmatory research, for example, right? So, so there are different approaches to that. I would say do whatever increases transparency and openness of your research. And here, I think it might be worth to pre-register or also qualitative studies.
Thanks. Thanks so much. And also, early career researchers, would you recommend, well, I guess you recommend doing this, pre-registering studies, but do you know any concerns or challenges discussed regarding pre-registration when you're a PhD student, for instance?
Something that we hear most often is time concern, right? So early career researchers are very often in these short contracts, either it's 3, 4, 5-year PhD contract, 2-year postdoc contract. And they say, well, I just need to get my data. I just need to get my data, my results. I don't have time to sit and draft my pre-registration and, spend time on that. But as I said earlier, you sort of use more time in the planning phase, but you gain more time at the data analysis and writing phase, because you have developed your analysis plans, maybe even your analysis code. I did that before, and we developed an analysis code at the pre-registration stage, and then it's not as simple, but it's almost like just a click, and the code analyzes your data once the data is there collected. So it saves you some time from that post data collection stages. So if you think about that this way, then maybe time will not be as much of a concern as it would originally.
Thank you. I can't see any more questions. And time is getting away.
Hour, yeah, that's perfect.
So we need to draw things to a close. Thank you so much for your wonderful talk, Agata, and thank you again for everyone for joining us today. This talk will be uploaded on our YouTube channel as always, and I also encourage you to check our upcoming talks on our website and on Twitter. We'll see you again next time. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.